Okay, sorry everyone for the audio troubles. I guess Loda will be with us in a second again. So this is the panel with the slightly cumbersome title, Regulation versus Governance, who is marginalized, who is privileged, and is privacy the right focus? So I think what we've all learned over the last couple of panels, over the last hours of today, is that many of us have been thinking about security and privacy needs for certain groups of people that we often refer to as marginalized. I'm not even sure if that's a good term anymore, because there seem to be so many of these groups of people that it really affects like a huge group of the population. We've also been talking about how these security and privacy requirements or needs often intersect directly with safety requirements for these groups of people, for these communities. And we're talking about online safety as well as direct physical safety. And we've also listened a little bit about or learned a little bit about what people expect, how digital platforms should behave in order to cater for people's safety security needs, but also for their direct safety. And I think in this panel, we want to distill this a little bit again, but look at rather specific examples from a couple of communities that we have personal experience with. So I'm Jan Tobias Mühlberg. I'm a researcher at KU Leuven, and one of the aspects that I've been working is people on the move, sans-papier community specifically, and there we see groups of people who need to interact with digital platforms, often being aware that their data traces can become a problem for them personally, for their own safety, for their visa applications, for their proceedings in migration procedures, and so forth. We just had the EDPS Civil Society Summit that was looking into that specific topic and raising a couple of points there. Another community that we want to look into specifically are sex workers who need to use online platforms to advertise their services, to communicate with clients, specifically in times of Corona, and who have concerns about their own safety while using these platforms, but also about being to some extent exploited by these platforms for advertising purposes, by these platforms for using their own materials, but also are constantly at the risk of just being shut down from certain platforms by regulation, by platforms deciding that this kind of services are not appropriate anymore for the audience, things like that. And on this specific topic, we have Lola here, who's a representative of Utsopi, that's the Belgian sex worker community. And we have this, Dr. Elisa Redmiles here, who works at the Max Planck Institute for Software Systems, and who has a long experience in working on security and privacy needs of sex workers. And another community we actually want to look in are children and their interactions with, for example, educational platforms or online gaming platforms, and how these platforms potentially exploit data of these subjects and how they might potentially subject children to forms of discrimination or other forms of exploitation based on the data traces they leave on these platforms. We were planning to have Professor Patricia Garcia here as one of the speakers from the University of Michigan, who has been working with Black girls in educational communities in the US. Unfortunately, she cannot make it for personal and COVID-related reasons. We still have Tommaso Crepax here from Santa Anna in Pisa, who has been working partly together with me on this topic and who will share a little bit of their insights on data collection in online games and what that might potentially mean for children, and to what extent parents can even protect the data subjects in that case from abuse. And then coming from these different points, we want to talk about how we see platform governance and how we want platforms to protect people's safety, people's well-being, and cater for their subject rights. So my wish would be, since I still don't see Lola in the chat and in the audio channel, my wish would be that Tommaso starts with talking a little bit about what you work on and what you found out, and then maybe we can switch to Lola and get some hands-on experience on how the situation looks for sex workers. Tommaso, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tobias, for the introduction, and thank you very much to all the panelists. I feel like what I'm about to say, at least in the beginning, is going to sound quite familiar to many, if not most of you. However, the fact that something so obvious still today must be restated in January 2022 is pretty much self-explanatory as to why it is important indeed to find new solutions even to old problems. Now, let me start with a quote. The defining industry of our time is the capture and resale of, it's not personal data, it is capture and resale of human attention. And these are the words of Tim Wu, who is summarizing the attention economy, where not data, but attention is the new oil. But wait a minute, we've all been told over and over again along these years that data was the new oil. So, if human attention is the new oil, what is the role of data in the attention economy? Now, the competition among big tech giants to predominate in this attention economy sparked a Knowles-Barrett arms race to find the most efficient techniques to engage and preserve users' attention. And this is nothing new. They use dark patterns, they use nudges, they use sludges, and all sorts of other forms of manipulation, really. Now, this arm race brings up an attention war. And in this attention war, digital is firmly at the center, and rights, unfortunately, are left at the margins. In attention war, you can easily imagine who are the civilians, to which category will belong amongst the civilians the casualties, unfortunately, and who in the society, together with their rights, is left at the margin. Now, the hyper-personalization of both dark pattern, which is what makes us fall in the trap, and of hyper-personalization of the content, that's what keeps us in the trap, is possible thanks to the collection and analysis of, well, surprise, surprise, gigantic amount of personal information. And that's the answer to our question. So human attention is the oil still, but personal data is the drill that's used to extract it. Now, the whole economic system is so wide-reaching and so pervasive that it generated a global problem, really, of digital manipulation, digital addiction. If you want to know more about it, there's Zuboff, who's written plenty about it, but also more like Snowden, Hal variant, and all of those. The system is unfortunately exacerbated in one paradigmatic commercial example, which also together with Tobias we studied quite recently, which we call the ultimate data collection, manipulation, and addiction machine, which is free-to-play online games. Those many of you call, like, in the name of freemiums. So these are games which have a data-driven business model, which is based on fully on personal data analytics, fueled technically on the one side by machine learning, AI, and whatnot, and economically by predatory marketing tactics, even neuromarketing tactics. Now, these online games literally use thousands of what to call sticky features to hijack users' minds. You have daily logins, streak rewards, rewards for ad watching, you have timed alerts, push notifications, the use of red icons, summons for when you're already out of the game, that keeps you on the loop constantly. Back in the trap, stay in the trap. Now, because freemiums are free to play, then of course they're vastly played by younger children. So of course everyone uses those games, but mostly children. But just to sum up, so these freemiums are a paradise, or perhaps a hell, for children profiling, children manipulation, and children addiction. Just really let it sink in. These are services that are created with principles of addiction by design, not privacy, and compulsion by design in their core mechanics. And well, the risks are pretty high. Children are exposed to psychological, social, physical, and mental health risks. Like not long ago, the World Health Organization has included gaming disorder in the International Classification of Disorders and Diseases. Well, my nephew is only 9 years old, and he has been for years the praise of the Googles, the Metas, the Ubisoft, the Roblox, the GAFAM, the Gamma, whatever you call them, that's feasting on his attention. And these are the most, of course, critical years for his upbringing, and that's without even knowing it and his parents knowing it. And with repercussions that will perhaps endure forever if you've read the permanent record. Now, the power imbalance is really what's shocking me the most. These are, to rephrase Wilson, godlike technologies taking advantage of children's paleolithic emotions. My question is, as a lawyer and a researcher in this, is how do we even get there? So as for law, well, the practical implementations in the EU human rights, but also consumer law, and up until recently, digital service regulation, have failed the test of digital reality, mostly due to, I'd say, 3+ reasons. One is the discounting of negative effects on children, of the future of children. One other one, and we've been discussing this today, it's the overestimation of supervisory authorities' capabilities versus well, on the one hand, the data protection as law of everything, as Portola would say it, and the enforcement paralysis that we've seen in recent years, which are, of course, linked. A general fixation on risk-based regulation, which relies on notice and consent, which does not account for, well, the privacy paradox, the privacy calculus, which is discounted by cognitive biases. And what's most interesting to me, in the words of Sartori, is that the fact that data subjects' opportunity to consent to risks that they do not understand for good reasons is not an asset for them, but a liability. But there's one more thing. We claim that the failure is due to a fundamental error in the detection of the asset to protect. This asset, in fact, is not the human right to privacy, let alone data protection, but something that goes beyond privacy. Now, what is that and how do we fix this? A hint to the solution was indicated by the Council of Europe in 2019 when they produced a declaration on the manipulative capabilities of algorithm processes. And I'm going to read about it. So they say, fine-grained, subconscious, and personalized level of algorithm persuasion may have significant effects on the cognitive autonomy of individuals, yada, 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 which may weaken the exercise and enjoyment of individual human rights and to the corrosion of the very foundation of the Council of Europe. Now, what is the solution? Well, in my opinion, and not only my opinion, Suzy Allegri is another one that has this opinion before me probably, is that the right to privacy, as in self-determination, the right to autonomy, when applied to certain kinds of digital manipulation and addiction, shall be upgraded, read under the lenses of the right to freedom of thought. Of course, it is perhaps too naive right now to think that, okay, such a grade should immediately apply to everyone without overturning the surveillance capitalistic system. We all know it's here to stay for a while. Anyhow, during times of war, the attention war, we should at least maybe have the decency to save the most vulnerable, which, in my understanding, amongst which, at least, are children. Now, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, in General Comment 25, it says that states parties should respect the right of the child to freedom of thought. State parties should prohibit practices that manipulate or interfere with children's right to freedom of thought. And this is the first time in which we're talking about freedom of thought in the UNCRC. Now, to end, the correct shield for children against digital manipulation addiction is the absolute human right of freedom of thought. And make no mistake, privacy is not an absolute right. It's only qualified. So, because freedom of thought is absolute, it cannot lawfully be interfered with, no matter how important the public interest is, and no matter what other qualified human right will the big tech come out with to legitimize children manipulation. And that's pretty much what I think about the topic.
Okay, that's a good starting point. So we have Lola back, so I'm really happy. We have a pretty much complete panel. Thanks a lot for being here. I think so. After having heard Tommaso's opinion on children protection online games, I think I would want to have a round with Lola on sex workers, on their perceived and real privacy and security requirements, and how you see platforms, and how you feel that platforms protect your safety or do not. So Lola, the floor is yours. You're muted. You are muted, Lola.
Yes, I'm unmuted now. I'm so sorry. I have a way with technology that it doesn't always work out with me. So thank you, Jan Tobias. My name is Lola and I'm speaking for Utopie. Utopie is a union in support of sex worker rights in Belgium since 2015, run by sex workers and allies. The work we do consists of political work concerning the decriminalization of sex work in Belgium, and also providing social cynical support in different places around Belgium, Brussels and Flanders. As an organization, we don't really have researched expertise on privacy and safety yet, so rather a basic understanding of how it's lived and how digital spaces are perceived safe or not for sex workers. So doing the field work, and since sex workers are experts of their own reality, I'm going to speak from this perspective based on the questions we get to deal with in the community work. I think that internet also has provided substantial benefits for sex workers. In general, it made it easier for more people in the industry to find each other and fully organize their own work and logistics. Downside on the cyber workspace for sex workers are mostly matters of access, privacy, safety, algorithmic biases that kind of exclude and police sex worker businesses. So this is an impact we should also be studying on Belgian terms. And yeah, of course, sex worker identities are dependent on the internet as a site for like informational exchange, to gather, find community, to use practical tools for payment, digital communication with clients, self-advertisement. So how do we kind of keep it clean? How do we prevent cross-contamination across different accounts and devices? How do we minimize the likelihood of our personal information being leaked and shared? So in taking care of our online behavior as sex workers, we kind of want to secure own sex worker identities, but also secure the identity of our clients, who often have as big as a wish in staying anonymous. We want to secure the community and our colleague workers, and also secure third parties like family and friends, co-workers, from potential exposure and stigmatization. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, little tips I think of and I give the people I work with are exactly also using different browsers for different profiles. Try not to share your location with your apps too many times. Use end-to-end encrypted communication. Try to not mix so much your working profiles and your private devices. Be mindful about how and where you use your legal name on social media. So I think it's very basic prevention and protection. As I say, we're not really experts on. I'm not yet the sexy tech nerd I wish to be. But yes, sex work is embodied work. So for many workers, it means a good separation of the work in a private sphere. And that's a boundary between the physical and the digital that actually overlaps while working, which makes it not easy to protect your information either. So in our physical spaces, when we host clients at home, for example, we also go through the process of removing sensitive information, covering up photos, covering up letters, official documents, etc. Everything that gives away like identity, so people cannot like name search and find us on our private profiles. And this is similar to how we should kind of behave online, where we need to practice a good digital hygiene. Yeah, so example, we had a sex worker whose clients did find out their legal name. So next what happened is they got unannounced presence at their address. This is an example in the physical world, but an online scenario is where a client's fixation for a sex worker who is a member of us led to threatening to expose them, which the client then pursued by creating a fake profile, Facebook profile and a fake Facebook page, and it led to the profile being getting rid of, but the page we could not delete because of different policy or something. So it's a lot of difficulties in these things. But yeah, these are still very up-to-date scenarios workers come to us about, rather than official instances like police and such. Yeah, the general fears and concerns from the community stem from the fear of being doxxed, having the loss of privacy and having your personal information shared, being outed as a sex worker. So in terms of prevention and harm reduction, this is something social support organizations should be definitely informed about. And fear of losing privacy is also a reflection of a state of surveillance and censorship under which sex workers operate. Thinking about losing access to services, deplatformation by algorithms. And as we know, algorithms also have proved kind of a lack to like a moral fiber, so it's really hard by the rules they make up if algorithms are not able to distinguish like nuances between what is pleasurable and what is problematic. Same fears for financial systems, digital financial transaction. To begin well, services and apps are willingly wanting to be linked to a sex worker's income. So that makes sex workers often suspicious of using digital payment platforms. Since it's also linked to our personal information, the fear is what if all of our data is getting collected and sold to someone who is going to out us? What if our activities are being monitored? What if I will lose my social support because of that? What if I'm committing federal crime? What if a lot of questions? So just to illustrate that even like mundane tasks like banking and payments actually have a weight to them, which is very annoying a lot. Yeah, just to highlight that safety in all means is something sex workers are very concerned and occupied with. We just want to have a stress-free and healthy and normal life, and safety in the field will mean many different things to many different people, considering all of the diversity in identities we want to protect. And the anonymity, remaining anonymous, is one big way to do so. I think that really helps as a protection. And it's not just a brainless action, it's actually a whole work on itself, remaining private. Because we, sex workers just also use a lot of different devices for a lot of different accounts, like email accounts, social media accounts, sex worker profiles, kinky profiles, payment processes, all these things. And we reach out to a lot of different people, between clients, our community again, or personal spheres. So that leaves light behind a lot of traces, meaning a lot of data needs to be protected. Yeah. How can technology become beneficial towards seeing freeing futures for sex work and help create sex positive spaces online? I do wonder, because I don't have the answers. I just work in the fields. I think of definitely super secure and stable platforms. Again, payments, secure payments, making sure you are getting paid and not being flagged by your bank. I think could be nice to have some kind of like a mutual feedback with the client and the worker, where you can leave both like positive and negative feedback, kind of like you can do a self-screening in who you would like to work with. Of course, not everyone is in a position to deny clients. I think what's also important is a nuance in flagging, making sure we don't see threats of violence the same way as a client not showing up, which is also very annoying and happens so often, and you lose time and money over it, especially when you're the one who's moving towards the space. But it's not the same way we should alarm these profiles. I think of a moderation on platforms. Red Light is actually doing a really good job on this. They're also screening whoever is underage, filtering them out, going against forms of exploitation and harm. So monitoring to have a safe space to find your clients at, communicate, like your advertisements. So yeah, this is very general, I think. Based on the most fears that come up, definitely payments, privacy and such. And now I thought about a bit about my position doing community work in ITSOP. I think it is good for me or for us to start think of response plan. Think about what do we want to protect, who do we want to protect it from, what are the implications of having that information shared? What are the risks? What are we going to take seriously and what not? And really help. The legal status of sex work in Belgium is non-existent. So it's not that there's many ways we can help ourselves since we have a tolerated status of sex work. A decriminalization would already be heaven. A lot of more possibilities in being safe. What also could be good for organizations like us is collaboration in hosting workshops for sex workers and gaining more insights in crypto payments, everything like with tokens, alternative payments online.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting perspectives, very personal perspectives as well. Maybe if we now move to Elissa, we can take a step back because you have maybe data on the bigger picture, what happens international on the sex worker scene and how people protect themselves and what the safety and privacy requirements are there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to pick up a couple of threads that Lola has brought up. And so the context for what I'll speak about is some of the empirical work in our own group, which consists of both sex working researchers as well as allies who are academic researchers. And we have studied sex workers in the EU as well as sex workers who do work in the US, although primarily that has been with folks who have switched to online work in the US context. So the first part was kind of this piece of deplatforming. And I think for some of the folks in the panel, like one of the questions I often get is sort of what is the regulatory framework, right, that sort of leads to this deplatforming. And Lola mentioned like the moral encoding in these algorithms, right? And a lot of times Not in all cases, but in the case of a lot of large platforms. So if we think about PayPal, or we think about Facebook, or we think about Airbnb, these are platforms that started in the US, right? And so a lot of times the US internet regulation context can influence how these platforms react. And so there's sort of this US moral encoding that gets put in these platforms. And that means that people might not have access to the platforms for business, right? As Lola mentioned, for being able to take payments, et cetera. They may get flagged and they may get banned for life from the platform, even if the work that they're doing is legal and registered in the country in which they're doing it. The other thing that it means that we got a number of reports about, and there have been news articles about as well, is that people can get banned from platforms even for just being identified as a sex worker. So like Airbnb has a patent that uses mysterious machine learning in order to identify people who, for a variety of different reasons, they don't want to use Airbnb. And so even if you say have 3 different devices, one for your sex work, one for your personal work, and then one just for Airbnb, which one person described to us, Airbnb was still able to determine that they're a sex worker and ban them from using Airbnb, even though they didn't want to use it for their work. They just wanted to stay for vacation. And so there's this sort of regulation of your identity as someone who works in a particular area versus just the work itself, both of which are problematic, but that sort of shows the depth to which this kind of moral encoding can go. This kind of deplatforming, right, also creates invisibility, and Lola has much more experience, I'm sure you could share about this, but some of the folks that we spoke with talked about the fact that even if they were working in a country where sex work was legal, they still wanted to do activism or share articles about sex work regulations, et cetera. And so when there is kind of platform policing of any conversations, let's say about commercial sex work, that can lead to the community becoming sort of invisible online, which can have problems for community activism and worker rights and so forth. The second piece that I wanted to pick up on was this idea of sort of what are the digital tools, right? And Lola mentioned this idea of you have these separate accounts and you have these separate devices and you try to keep the information separate on them. And that can be really challenging and really overwhelming for folks, right? Like Lola mentioned, this is not brainless work. This is something that takes a lot of effort. And so from the kind of developer side, one of the things we think about a lot is that in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, kind of existing privacy tools, things like privacy settings, et cetera, those kind of aren't good enough, right? They aren't trustworthy enough. There are sometimes software errors, et cetera. And so folks are really having to kind of roll their own options, like having separate devices. And so is there space for us to do development or research that would, say, allow for hardware segmentation on a single device where you could guarantee that the signature of the devices would look different, et cetera? Are there other tools that one could design to kind of help people manage these separate profiles? Because that idea is not how many internet platforms were designed, right? They want you to have one profile that they aggregate all of this data about. And so how do we kind of push against that through the development of tools? A secondary point in tool development is that often when we think about developing privacy tools, we think of one individual using this tool, right? But in some cases, it's both the client and the worker who need to be able to use the tool. So like Lola brought up cryptocurrency, right? One of the things that we heard from folks was, I really don't use cryptocurrency that much, not necessarily because of my own comfort level, but because my clients don't know how to use it. And, just like I can't ask my employer to necessarily pay me in cryptocurrency, because that would be like a lot of effort for them to figure out, there is kind of a two-way relationship here. And so that's a little bit of a different development context than what we typically have when we're thinking about particular tools. Same thing for, end-to-end encrypted chat, et cetera. And then the final piece that I wanted to kind of pick up on from the things that Lola raised was, that privacy is part of this holistic type of safety, right? So when we think about privacy, sometimes we think about privacy from data aggregation or kind of privacy as a personal right, which it absolutely is. It's also part of this broader sense of safety, right? Am I having my boundaries respected? Do I have physical safety so that someone isn't going to stalk me? Do I have the type of safety in which there's actually, someone who can respond when there are problems, right? So if I have a physical safety problem, is law enforcement or whoever I go to going to take those seriously? And the digital piece of that last component, I've heard a lot about recently from folks we've spoken with who do online only work, where they're producing content or they're doing kind of live video streams, and they're finding that content gets screen recorded, downloaded, kind of basically stolen and distributed around the internet, and there are not good mechanisms for tracking that content or getting it back. And there's also sometimes the assumption that because you're creating intimate content, you must be consenting for it to go everywhere on the internet. But that's not the case, right? You might be consenting to put your content in one particular place for one particular audience. You're not consenting for it to go everywhere. And so I think from kind of a technologist standpoint, that's making sure that we're building tools, we're building regulation that respects where people are comfortable having their content, where people are comfortable having their data associated with what platforms, what uses, what identities. How do we build tools that kind of make sure that people are able to have that consent-based ownership over their content and over their data? That was it for me.
So I observed one really interesting thing from the statements I have so far, and that is we talk about groups here that have completely different awareness of their privacy needs and also completely different ability to act. So what I understand from Elissa and Lola right now is that sex workers are very much aware and very consciously choose the services and devices and whatever they want to work with to control what they can control. But for example, for the children, the statement we had by Tommaso before, or the people on the move, the example I introduced earlier, or that we've learned from in the previous panels, the situation is different, right? So people on the move, for example, are often very much aware from my personal experience, but they'll just consent to everything because they have no choice. But they are so much under pressure to use whatever communications infrastructure they have to find some short-term employment or to get access to certain funds or certain services that they really have no choice to choose the platform. And for children, I think it's even further on that spectrum. They use what their parents give them, and the awareness is often not there. So I'm trying to push this back to Tommaso. How can we deal with these different levels of awareness and of ability to act upon the awareness?
Well, the problem that you perfectly identified, it's exactly one of awareness. I mean, on the one hand, you have people, so there's privacy, which is at different levels still brought up as a fundamental, fantastic human right. So on the one hand, you have, again, sex workers who need the privacy to be in digital platforms, whereas you have kids or children in which they still would like to use the same platforms, but without having the risk that they don't even know they're running right now. And the problem is not only of they themselves, but also like of the type of regulation that are being designed so to protect them, and which rely on, again, consent and notice and consent and telling you like what are the risks. But again, as also Elissa just mentioned right now, it's a problem of contextual integrity. So the fact that a naked picture is in a platform for, I don't know, for sexual workers is a thing. If that same picture is on a billboard, it's the same exact thing, but in different contexts. So we go back again to the contextual integrity, and for children, other than like kind of tweaking and reading the right of privacy under the new lenses of freedom of thought, there's not much else other than technical solutions that that you yourself devised.
But your reasoning in the framework of freedom of thought is, for example, at least I don't see it yet, it's not applicable, for example, the sex worker case.
I wouldn't say so, and the reason is the fact that we can apply the right to freedom of thought. It has two reasoning mainly. One is the fact that children are still developing their thoughts. Therefore, manipulation can have not only longer effects but more critical effects. That's one thing. And second is there is, thanks to the General Comment 25 of the UNCRC, there is a reference in the law now, which, by the way, the DSA references to. So now it's not that far-fetched that we can actually use the right of freedom of thought as the last line of defense against manipulation for children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lola, you mentioned at some point that you have good collaborations with Red Lights, which is one of the platforms that is heavily used for sex workers to advertise their services in Belgium. Can you maybe say a little bit about how that collaboration works and what the platform is doing to make it a safe space for the people you support?
Yeah, it's definitely a safer space because I think it's a platform that also recognizes its responsibility of hosting advertisements in a very sensitive field where people are also actively fighting against human trafficking and child pornography and all of these things. So it's really important that there's also a moderation happening on these parts, which is happening. So there are moderators who actively kind of do screening of the profiles and give tools for people to inform them about what is legal and what's not and how to act on it, which I think is really important as users or as clients or workers. There is also the opportunity to report bad clients. So there's not a lot of websites or like web pages that have the opportunity to alert someone. But then again, I don't think there's a nuanced way of doing it. And if it's a page full of phone numbers, I'm also critical about like how do we then, if we get a text message or a phone call from someone, at the same time screen it in the list of phone numbers. How can we centralize or like automatize blocking certain type of numbers? That could be also like thinking a bit in the future. But yeah, in these ways, definitely by making sure it's not a total moral free website, meaning that harm can be done as well. We don't have to be naive. Of course, there's people who are out to have bad intentions. So I think I really like to put them out as a good example on this.
Yeah, quite interesting. I think so. So these rating schemes exist for many things, like for Uber drivers and for Uber clients and whatever. But I do have a feeling that they're in no case actually legitimate. So I'm worried about all this data collection from all sides, whether it's for good intentions or for bad intentions.
Yeah, I can understand. Maybe just like adds up to the whole data pool. But then it's also like combining a desire to also have more of like a general or like more extensive profile. If it's about who you would like to work with, it could be nice to see like, oh, this is actually someone who has had good experiences with his client. Oh, he looks attractive. Then it becomes more of like a mutual exchange. But maybe that's already a luxury, or like that's already looking ahead a bit. But in terms of like sex positivity, it could be a good way to develop as well. But then how do you do this? How do you like apply this without complicating things further and leaving more traces? Yeah.
I think one piece too that's sort of interlaced through both what Tomasa and Lola have mentioned is, can we shift toward better partnership in some cases, right, between the platform and the end user? So a lot of times I think when we talk about privacy, we think about it as sort of like anti-platform or adversarial or something like that. And platforms in a way are often designed in this sort of carceral or adversarial way, right? Like people post content and then the content gets taken down and they're punished for having posted something incorrect, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about a bit is like, what does it look like when, say, a platform provides a transparency tool where someone can, say, pre-upload an image and get told whether or not that's permitted on the website, right? Like this is something I think Lola was sort of mentioning about what happens if that gets moved up earlier. So it's sort of collaborative between the platform and the end users to make the kind of community they want. Similarly, what would it look like if platforms got votes from users that they aggregated in a reasonable way around kind of what kind of privacy protections they might prefer? Obviously, that has to be balanced again, like against what makes the platform viable to operate. But there is a lot of opportunity here, I think, to create more partnerships where all of the stakeholders have a voice. For example, clients and workers and whatever the platform's needs are in terms of monetization. So I think that's one piece as well that would make people feel like they have more autonomy and might actually realize more autonomy, as opposed to being in this situation where you're kind of stuck with the tools that are available.
So community-driven governance. Tommaso, do you think that could work in a children and parent context with game providers?
The law is there. The law is there. Human rights are there. I mean, it enough with the law, which is catching up with the technology. No, law was there already. Human rights were there already. So how about we again, it's a matter of, again, how do you enforce it? But the law, it's nice enough. So it really is a matter of enforcement at some point. And whether that's governance-based, yes, to some extent, I'm fine with it. But in certain, so we need to understand that there are some specifics and some characteristics of some vulnerable digital users, and that some types of business models and cannot be used on those types of vulnerabilities. You cannot make money out of children. That's as easy as I can make it.
There's also the question in the chat whether you know of resources or anything that allows children as individuals to better fend for themselves against such threats. I'm kind of wondering if that even makes sense.
You mean, should really children be the last line of defense?
Should we enable children, or should children be the last line of defense? Children are meant to play and fall and back up and getting back up again. And the data that we collect while they fall and while they make stupid videos online shall not be used against them in 10 years' time, nor used right now to start collecting data that will, I don't know, in 10 years' time make their
insurance, health insurance more expensive. I don't stand it. I can't. It does not have to be on children, nor their parents. It's too complicated.
Yeah, I think that's important to make a point. Also for their parents, it is often too important to understand what data is being collected where and what it might potentially be useful. So Luisa says we have 5 minutes left. Last round. How do you, if you're in a world where all your choices will come through, how do you anticipate platforms to be governed in a future to care for the community that you work with? 2 minutes each, or 1 minute each. Elisa, if you want to go. I see you smiling.
Sure. I was like, oh, that's a hard question and a good question. I guess kind of picking up, right, this community-driven governance piece. There's been increasing interest in what they call like decentralized online platforms, right? So if we think about things like Mastodon, et cetera. And I think one of the interesting things that I expect to see change there, whether it's for those platforms or even platforms like Reddit, et cetera, is kind of recognition of the labor involved in moderation or the labor involved in doing community-driven governance. And so I imagine that we may see a shift toward more and more kind of paid, whether they're freelance positions or et cetera, paid positions to allow for more community-driven moderation, possibly in these kind of decentralized communities.
Lola, your opinion?
Yeah, it's nice to think about like idealization of these things. So as I say, I'm not an expert on all the digital, but what I see would be like how I see it. What would be amazing is if we would give more voice and platform to field organizations as well to be able to give an evaluation of platforms in a way that we are also being heard as users, and we can have impact on this level. That the evaluation comes from the experiences I gather and collect, let's say, and we as non-experts and academics and researchers on the digital spaces also have autonomy. Would be my very simplified answer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Tommaso?
Do you know when we were all kids and we were with our friends playing in our rooms, and then the parents would come in and they would like just stop all at once doing whatever we're doing?
Every day.
Yes, that happens every day, right? So how about that type of privacy space for children themselves? Like, I mean, a place where even when willing to, there's no centralization. So of course, decentralized systems, definitely decentralized systems. Of course, in our case, it cannot be, let's say, governed by children themselves. But giving to decentralization the biggest, I'll put it this way, making sure that the system is decentralized to a point where no one can enter in the room and prey on kids playing.
Okay, I think it's 4:20, and with this we have to finish. I'm sorry for the hiccups at the beginning, and thanks everyone for listening to us, and I hope we all learned something about how we can maybe build platforms better. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.